We move then to petition number 1916, which is the Rest and Be Thankful. And rested and thankful is David Torrance.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, Cabinet Secretary, and good morning to the other witnesses. Access to Argyll project, I believe in your opening statement, would be funded from capital budget. And as you know, this committee has a long-standing history with the Rest and Be Thankful, going as far back as session 4 in the Parliament, where we've visited, we've seen improvements to catchment nets, to stabilising the hill, to the old military road. So, Cabinet Secretary, what assurances can you give that the budget, the capital budget, in place is going to deliver long-term solutions?
So, in relation to the plan, the project, the short, medium and long-term, the route, and in terms of the option that was chosen, has been chosen, is now embarking on its initial, we talked about the design manual, it's going through its processes there. The short-term improvements, you've got obviously the catchment, you've seen one of the issues we had, actually, funny enough, we were in Inverary at one of the A83 task force. I think Jackie Bailey, as one of the MSPs, dialed into that meeting, but it was actually just before Storm Babette. And so we were hearing directly from Amy what was going to happen with the rainfall that was expected. And then a couple of days later, saw the consequences of that. So in terms of the short term, what's also had to happen there is some of the landslides have actually been wider than the initial areas that was identified as investment there. There has been significant work done on the medium term, which is strengthening the Old Military Road and bends, etc. And there's been quite a lot of work invested in the Old Military Road to help with diversions now, but also what will be required when the final design is placed on the long-term project, which is actually the covering and the project that's going to be there to make sure that the long-term sustainable future for that road is there. In terms of capital budgets, we are subject, as you'll be aware, that we don't keep pots of money sitting as to say that's marked for the A83 only to be opened at such times as it is then to be invested in. Why is that the case? Because as we know, because we're only starting on the initial aspects of the DIMB, we're again issuing the draft orders. My colleagues will remind me when they went out for the, I'm just trying to check. December, yeah. So it was December that we've got draft orders out. That's the initial, so therefore we've got to go through that process. In terms of the end of the process was February, and I probably shouldn't say too much just now, but we're going through the process of looking at that. Hopefully, as again with other aspects, there isn't a public inquiry. If there is a public inquiry, that means that the capital requirement, but that's what you're asking for, won't be necessarily in the next year or the year after. It could take a bit longer, and you've still got the statutory processes to continue. So the capital allocation will be required at some point. The major capital allocation for the construction will be required going forward. We have got funding this year to progress the items that we know need done this year, and I think that's important to put on record. But clearly going forward, and this is an area that other MSPs regularly ask, it is part of that, trying to manage the budget well in advance and when it's needed, and having it ready when it's needed to be deployed. One of the things I would say is that the 6 monthly task force report is open to all councillors, all MSPs. They don't always attend. They sometimes send researchers, etc. But there's an openness there that people can hear, and there's very helpful. So it's Bear, so apologies to Bear. It's Bear that provide a lot of the updates on the current aspects and improvements, and we also get from our engineers and consultants how they're progressing with the next stages. So I've probably covered quite a lot there, but realistically, part of the planning is to ensure that there's capital available when it is needed, and that's what we will be doing with the A83.
Cabinet Secretary, petitioners have argued that the development of a route on the opposite side of Glencroe would be preferable to a current interim measures focused on the Old Military Road. Can you explain why this option has not been taken forward?
So, I mean, again, this is historic, and obviously at the time that there were different options put forward, and there was major consultations that took place. We know, and there are people who insist that they want to have a different route than the one that was finally decided, and you know, to varying degrees still argue that. But there are problems with all the different routes that were there. We are now quite well in the stage of the final design option, which I think was agreed in June 2023. I think it was actually. It was quite some time back. And there are problems with the alternates that people have said there. You know, so therefore, you know, it's kind of. And I think that's a challenge for the committee, is it's looking at something that has a history. You've obviously been involved in the A83 probably longer than I have as Cabinet Secretary for Transport, and it has had a long history. But what I would be concerned about is that if anybody in holding out for an option that was investigated, consulted on, but rejected some time ago, wants to hold up what the current provision is, and I would really worry for the people of Argyll. I think this is an essential work that has to be done to make sure that there's a sustainable future for the economy and the communities of Argyll. So I can understand and appreciate where they came from at the time, but I think we've moved on from that now.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Cabinet Secretary, the petitioners have argued about the usefulness of proposed long-term solutions for Western Befankfield and have argued for a tunnel or a viaduct. Why have these suggestions not been taken on board?
Can I maybe ask, it's okay if I ask Lawrence Chapman to come in on that one, please?
Yep, there were 5 main options considered before deciding on the debris flow shelter along the existing road, which is the long-term solution preferred option, which we published the draft orders on. Tunnel option was considered, a viaduct down the valley. Looking at the option of a route on the other side of the glen was another option, and a bit of a hybrid option as well. And they were all assessed against a whole host of criteria, environmental impact, stability, a lot of engineering side of things. Obviously, cost comes into it, buildability, and the tunnel and a viaduct were options that were considered, and they did have some merits, but not to the extent that the proposed debris flow shelter has. So that's why they were rejected. And there's fully accessible reports on Transport Scotland's website, which you can look at to see all the reasoning behind that.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Torrance. I wasn't sure whether you were suggesting Mr. Torrance had been involved with the road longer than you, or whether he'd been involved longer than the road. But Jackie Bailey, would you like to just augment any comments with this particular route?
Thank you, Convener, and I think the road outstrips us all. But the petitioner, when they put in what is their second petition, is actually calling for a public inquiry into the political handling of it and the financial mismanagement, I think was their word, of the A83. I think things have moved on substantially, but I just note that their first petition was in 2012. So we've been at this a very, very long time, and we're at the foothills of things starting to happen. So I think we all appreciate their frustration. I wonder whether I could, in focusing on the future, ask the Cabinet Secretary, could she provide some more detail on, just in an indicative way, of how much will be needed and when, because I'm assuming you've done the profiling on the capital, and assuming, touch wood, that the draft orders go through and that there aren't objections and requirements for a full inquiry, what is the timeline likely to be now?
Okay, I am a bit circumspect about the draft orders and public inquiry because we're in a live situation just now, if you can respect that. In terms of the estimated cost for the permanent long-term solution, it's between 408 million and 510 million in Q4 2024 prices. And obviously, therefore, we need to identify then, in terms of delivery, how long that will take in terms of construction. There's obviously, and I think, significant investment also in the Old Military Road, and I've inspected that and seen that, and anybody going through will identify and see that as well as the ongoing issue around the short term, because, as I said, even with the improvements that were made, obviously, as we're talking about, wet weather, increasing wet weather, ground saturation, etc., there's a lot of science been involved in monitoring water levels, which also allows us in advance to activate the Old Military Road, which is required, which is different. And the other thing, and I want to probably say this publicly, is that we're also working very hard with BBC and STV. So when they are making announcements about what impact weather has, what we have been told locally is that A83 is still open even if it's with the old military road diversion. Why is that important? Is in the past and sometimes still they say the A83 is closed, and that implies that Argyll is closed, and it's not. So even, as I said, even things like that can make a difference. So we're working hard on that. It's a bit different from what you were saying. But in terms of the kind of rollout of spend, does anybody want to try and identify what's required when?
Well, we're at the present time continuing with ground investigation works, and there's cost associated with that, and trying to make sure that when we do get to the construction phase, as much information is known about the ground conditions. And obviously with civil engineering, most of the issues are the things that you can't see, what's in the ground, and making sure we know where the rock head is for foundations for that debris flow shelter, for example. But as we go forward, and obviously taking cognizance of what the Cabinet Secretary has said about the objection and representations period that we have at the moment, once that is out of the way, there's been a public inquiry if that's necessary, then we move on to the procurement stage. And we're finalising what the procurement will look like in terms of the type of contract that we'll have to put in place, bearing in mind that there's obviously an active hillside there, so a contractor will have some pretty strong challenges through the construction period. The procurement could take a year or 18 months or so, depending on how we factor in those particular concerns. And then the construction period would follow that, probably 3 or 4 years of construction, trying to make sure that we maintain traffic flows using the old military road to a large extent during the construction period, and hopefully we will get contractors who have got a good eye for innovation to make sure that the periods of disturbance to local users is minimised as much as possible, and that they obviously build the works in a safe and appropriate manner.
And,
So it could be 6 years, if I've picked you up correctly, with a fair wind.
Yeah, yes. I mean, it obviously will depend on the particular contractors and how well they are, and what the weather's like during construction as well, because if there is a landslide, then obviously that would have an impact on things.
And just to reassure you, and part of this is also the momentum, is there is 18.5 million for this financial year on the medium and long term, so it's kind of making sure things keep moving.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That brings us then to the petition number 1966.